the reporter who put ethics ahead of money. What causes a journalist who has worked flawlessly for 2 decades at one of the most influential news networks in America to quit? Catherine Herridge did not lose her job. She wasn't canceled. Scandal didn't drive her away. She made a decision that left viewers perplexed and coworkers stunned. This is where things become even more intriguing, though. She believed that CBS was her safe harbor as a journalist after quitting Fox News. That also didn't work out. She is currently facing contempt charges in a federal courtroom for protecting her sources, which is a duty expected of all investigative journalists. Catherine Herridge's journey reveals unsettling realities about contemporary media that networks don't want you to know, from Ivy League halls to intelligence briefing rooms, from the desk of a Fox News anchor to a layoff at CBS, from whistleblower tales to being shut out of her own email. The best aspect is that the battle she is currently engaged in has the potential to permanently alter journalism. Because every American investigative reporter loses something priceless if she loses this fight. However, we are overly optimistic. Because of the foundation she laid, what follows is all the more shocking, so let's start at the beginning. Catherine Herridge, a Canadian native, did not fall into journalism by accident. She was made for it. She arrived at Harvard University after relocating to the U.S. for school, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in journalism. She didn't stop there, though. She continued on to the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, where she earned her master's degree and established the kind of academic background that leads to opportunities. Journalism was not being played here. This individual recognized that expertise is the foundation of credibility. She joined Fox News in 1997 and rose to prominence as one of the industry's most reputable intelligence correspondents during the following 20 years. Herridge covered the issues that mattered as Fox's lead intelligence correspondent, including national security, military operations, governmental affairs, and terrorism. This type of reporting necessitates that sources entrust you with their lives and livelihoods, and it was her unwavering accuracy that gained her that trust. Her coworkers took notice. The audience took notice. The accolades began to accumulate. The New York Festival's Bronze World Medal, the Journalism Tex McGraw Award. These weren't awards for participation. These were recognitions that, in a field that was progressively making mistakes, she was doing something right. She became known for her reporting style. Avoid sensationalism. No virally popular hot takes. Simply the facts, presented in an understandable manner, without the dramatic outrage that had become commonplace in television news. Herridge was one of the few reporters who appeared more concerned with providing information than inciting controversy in a media environment that was making every story a battleground. She conducted high-profile interviews, broke important news, and established a reputation for refusing to compromise veracity for viewership. She would later find that reputation to be her greatest asset and the reason she was unable to stay. However, there were early indications that Herridge would not give in under pressure. She was involved in a wage disparity contract issue with Fox News back in 2010. She battled and prevailed because this was about principles, not just money. In hindsight, that instance served as a sneak peek at what lay ahead. It created a trend. If Catherine Herridge had to choose between convenience and values, she would always go with values. As a loving wife and mother, she managed to juggle a hard work with her family life throughout it all. She talked candidly on the difficulty of balancing these responsibilities, highlighting the importance of tenacity and commitment in both her personal and professional lives. Her multicultural upbringing shaped her viewpoint, and she was especially dedicated to making sure a range of voices were represented in her narrative. She wasn't merely fulfilling her duties, she sincerely thought that hearing from individuals from many walks of life was essential to successful journalism. This formula was effective for about 20 years. She flourished at Fox News, establishing her reputation one story at a time. Then, however, something changed. Her professional home, the network, began to feel less like home and more like a place where everything were up for negotiation. The full story starts at that point. Reporters inside the building sensed that something was shifting at Fox News during the late 2010s. The Trump era had come, and the network's coverage strategy had changed accordingly. The once imperfect balance between news and opinion was drastically shifting in favor of opinion. And not just any opinion, but opinion that was more and more in line with one political viewpoint. It wasn't just Catherine Herridge who saw this. Journalists began quitting Fox News in increasing numbers, and their exits weren't peaceful retirements. These were folks who were worried, who believed that the network was going beyond the bounds of what journalists were expected to do while covering Trump and his administration. Insiders described a growing polarization of the internal atmosphere. Not only was opinion-driven content flourishing, but it was also displacing objective reporting. And this created an insurmountable tension for someone like Herridge, whose entire career had been based on objective, factual reporting. She was put in a challenging situation. She had to question official narratives, follow the facts wherever they led, and hold everyone in positions of authority accountable for their actions. However, it appeared that the network was veering away from that concept. She could feel the walls closing in and the room for impartial journalism getting smaller. This had nothing to do with political differences. It has to do with something deeper. The question was whether facts that went against the favored narrative were still important. Catherine Herridge made her choice in 2019. After 20 years, she was leaving Fox News. The industry was shaken by the announcement. There was no retirement here. This was not a change of career. It was a declaration. She was going to work for CBS News. Her explanation was also instructive. She discussed CBS's dedication to strong investigations and enterprise journalism. She expressed her pride at being a part of a group that values facts and narrative. The meaning was obvious when you read between the lines. Facts weren't as important at Fox News as they once were, so she was going. Because what it stood for, the action garnered notice. A reputable intelligence correspondent with many sources and 2 decades of institutional expertise was leaving one of the most influential news channels. No one was pushing her. She made the decision to resign because she thought there was still a place in American journalism where facts were more important than ratings and impartiality triumphed over partisanship. Herridge's readiness to consider opposing viewpoints set her apart from many of her peers. She had no desire to serve as a partisan shield, someone whose reputation could be exploited to support editorial decisions with which she disagreed. Despite the increasing polarization of her surroundings, she had remained independent. Facts are important. She wasn't only saying it. Every tale she touched was guided by this notion, which served as her personal motto. She wasn't the only one who left. This was a component of a wider pattern. Gretchen Carlson's shocking lawsuit had been filed. In October 2019, Shepard Smith was scheduled to depart, evidently dissatisfied with the course of the network. In 2021, Chris Wallace would come next. These departures weren't arbitrary. These were journalists who had spent decades establishing their credibility, and they were choosing to leave rather than jeopardize it. The media environment was growing increasingly polarized, and preserving neutrality was getting more difficult every day. Thus, in 2019, Catherine Herridge joined CBS News, contributing her knowledge of national security and her track record of reliable, in-depth reporting. The business was observing. Would CBS be any different? Would fact-based journalism still be able to flourish here? She believed she had discovered a safe haven. This is where the plot changes, though. Even bad is this one. Although February 13th began as any other day, Catherine Herridge's world would be completely upended by the conclusion of the day. She received a call on Zoom. That was how her job was being terminated. But the layoff wasn't the only thing. How horribly things would turn out was shown by what happened subsequently. Without any prior notice or gradual transition, she was instantly exiled and shut out of the office and her correspondence. Then came the part that should worry all American journalists. Hundreds of pages of her reporting files were confiscated by CBS News. Not just any files, but ones containing private source data. Give it some time to sink in. A network that had assured her of a place for investigative journalism, enterprise journalism, and stories where narrative and facts would always be important. Her private source materials were just confiscated by that network. The assurance that sources can rely on reporters to keep their identities private is the cornerstone of investigative journalism, and CBS had recently taken over information that would reveal those sources. Herridge's layoff wasn't personal, to be fair. It was a component of a bigger bath of blood. That day, 20 workers lost their jobs. The network was struggling financially, just as all media companies. The sector was evolving. The behaviors of viewers were changing. Everything was being disrupted by streaming. The audience for traditional cable news was dwindling. Newsrooms around the nation were having to make tough choices due to economic restrictions. In the 2020s, this was journalism's new reality. However, Heritage's reaction to the layoff exposed the personality that had characterized her work. She didn't become resentful. She didn't publicly disparage CBS. She refused to be a victim. Rather, she remained true to the values that had steered her for decades. She discussed how the industry was evolving, but she maintained that the importance of factual reporting had not changed. She continued to promote journalistic ethics even while she was being forced out. However, beneath the polished reaction, there lurked a more concerning development. The files that CBS had taken were more than just documents. They included details regarding private sources, those who had relied on Heritage to keep them safe. And that information was now accessible to a network with its own corporate priorities, legal problems, and interests. There were serious ethical issues. Indeed, networks are entitled to content produced on their behalf. However, source protection is more than just morality. It serves as the foundation for investigative journalism. The irony was heartbreaking. Heritage felt that CBS showed a dedication to authentic journalism, which is why she had left Fox News. With its promises of top-notch enterprise journalism, CBS had essentially sold itself to her. The truth is that all networks are impacted by business forces. In today's media environment, there is no safe haven. Serious investigative journalism's economic model is flawed, and even networks that profess to respect it will compromise when budget cuts are demanded by spreadsheets. The industry has undergone a significant transformation, as Heritage and all-American journalists are discovering. The business model that once enabled journalists to devote months or years to gathering sources and pursuing stories, as well as to supporting investigative reporting, is dying. Content that is inexpensive to create and instantly engages viewers is what networks are looking for. It costs a lot to hire a journalist like Heritage to perform in-depth reporting on complicated national security matters. Additionally, costly items are cut when funds are tight. However, a layoff and some confiscated files are not the end of the story. A legal struggle that might forever alter journalism was about to revolve around one of the articles Heritage had worked on and one of the private sources she had safeguarded. And her career wasn't the only thing at stake this time. She was free. When Catherine Herridge initially reported the tale, it appeared to be simple. The FBI was looking into Yanping Chen, a Chinese-American physicist. Herridge had access to confidential sources that had informed her of the probe. Following the same moral standards that have guided investigative journalism for many years, she covered the subject for CBS News. Keep your sources safe. Don't break your word. Preserve confidence that enables further reporting. Then followed the order from the federal court. Herridge refused to disclose her sources when a judge asked her to do so, not because she wanted to be a martyr or because she was being difficult, but rather because disclosing those sources would go against the core idea that underpins investigative journalism. Because they believe their identities will be kept private, sources speak with reporters. Once you betray that confidence, all future sources will know they can't trust you. The system as a whole breaks down. She was found in civil contempt by the judge. Award-winning journalist Catherine Herridge received her education at Harvard and Columbia. After 2 decades of impeccable reporting, they are currently facing legal repercussions for adhering to the strictest standards of journalism ethics. It is impossible to exaggerate how ridiculous the situation is. By attempting to find information for a single case, the legal system was endangering the system that finds information for all cases. Here's why this is important for reasons other than Catherine Herridge's particular circumstance. Source protection isn't a nice-to-have journalism feature. It serves as the cornerstone. If whistleblowers fear their names will be included in court documents, they will not come forward. Employees of the government don't report misconduct if they think it will be discovered and dealt with. If corporate insiders fear reprisals, they won't reveal fraud. Investigative journalism fails if confidentiality is not guaranteed. Additionally, corruption flourishes in the shadows when investigative journalism is absent. The chilling effect is the legal phrase for what occurs when reporters are compelled to disclose their sources. One journalist in one situation is not the only issue. Every source is observing and determining whether or not to continue to trust reporters. Because the informants remain silent, it concerns all upcoming investigations that never take place. It concerns wrongdoing by the government and corporations that goes unpunished because the system for doing so has been disrupted. Herridge clarified that disclosing her sources would jeopardize the confidence she had established with them. However, trust was not the only factor. It has to do with safety. If their identities be made public, some sources could be seriously endangered. They risk losing their careers, their employment, and their security clearances. They might be charged with a crime in certain situations. A reporter must mean something when they make a confidentiality pledge. If not, the entire system is a fiction. This case was especially noteworthy because of the industry-wide support Herridge garnered. Prominent media outlets supported her. Supporters of the free press gathered around her. There was no partisanship involved. It has to do with press freedom. This was a consensus among journalists who differ on everything else. Pressuring reporters to disclose their sources creates a precedent that puts all journalism at risk. It was that important. However, this story has an additional dimension that adds to its remarkableness. Catherine Herridge brought a fresh lawsuit against Fox News at the end of 2023. In court, she is defending herself. Take a moment to consider that. A journalist who might have just left and pursued another job but was fired and is now facing contempt charges. Instead, because the principle is so important, she is standing in a courtroom defending herself. The complaint was filed shortly before the New York Survivors Act deadline of November 23, 2023. On December 4, Fox News and Fox Corporation received the lawsuit filing. She now has more time to make a thorough complaint and possibly bring her long-standing claims back to life thanks to this most recent action. She's not going to give up. She is not going to back down. She is fighting for freedom of the press, protection of sources, and the values that enable investigative journalism. What is truly at risk is made clear by the battle's unparalleled nature. This goes beyond a single journalist defending a single source. This concerns the practical significance of the First Amendment's protection of press freedom. It concerns America's investigative journalism's future. It concerns whether reporters are able to fulfill their commitments to sources. It concerns striking a balance between the free press's need to safeguard confidential sources and the justice system's demand for information. Investigative journalism as we know it will end if Herridge loses. If courts have the authority to force journalists to disclose sources whenever it suits a legal case, sources will stop speaking, reporters will stop gathering information, wrongdoing will remain hidden, the powerful will gain more power, and democracy will lose one of its most important checks on corruption. What does this all mean for the rest of us though? Why should the legal battle of a single journalist concern you? Because the story of Catherine Herridge is not solely about her. It concerns the state of truth, accountability, and journalism in the United States. You might be surprised to learn how deep the flaws she's showing are. Here are some lessons we can learn from Catherine Herridge's path from Fox News to CBS to a federal courtroom. The factors undermining journalism affect all networks. When opinion overshadowed facts, Fox News let her down. When business interests overshadowed her values, CBS let her down. And now, when it's inconvenient, the court system is putting the First Amendment's guarantee of press freedom to the test. The business model of journalism is flawed, which is an uncomfortable reality. Producing opinion-driven content is inexpensive and inspires fervent interaction. Investigative reporting is costly, time-consuming, and frequently infuriates influential people, such as corporate partners and advertising. Networks are aware of which ones are trimmed when they are under financial strain. Facts aren't as important as people think. We are witnessing the real-time shrinkage of the room for impartial journalism when facts negatively impact the financial line. All of the incentives favor partisan content. Liberal audiences seek confirmation of their opinions. Audiences of conservatives want their opinions validated. No one enjoys being challenged. Complexity is not desired by anyone. Nobody wants to hear that their side may be incorrect or that the truth may be uncomfortable. Because their companies follow money, networks react to these incentives. However, Harridge's fight against scorn is a sign of something far more perilous: the possible breakdown of source security. Investigative journalism is difficult if journalists are unable to maintain their confidentiality pledges. Misconduct by the government remains hidden, corporate fraud remains undetected, corruption flourishes. Because the system for holding the powerful accountable has been dismantled, they are not held accountable. Her experience also serves as a metaphor for all journalists who must make similar decisions: leave and face an unknown future, or stay and compromise your values. Defend your sources and risk legal repercussions, or abandon them and jeopardize the credibility of journalism. Although they shouldn't, these decisions define contemporary journalism. And what matters is that Harridge opted for principle over safety, career security, and the easy route. The truth of today's media is harsh. Because they must in order to thrive, networks put profit before morality. The cost of fact-based journalism is high. Opinion journalism is inexpensive. Audiences are being dispersed. Models of revenue are failing. The financial underpinnings that formerly underpinned professional journalism are disintegrating. Additionally, journalists like Catherine Herridge are trapped in the ruins, attempting to uphold standards in a field that is becoming more and more incapable of paying for them. It is impossible to overlook the human cost of her decisions. Financial instability, career disruption, protracted legal disputes, and supporting the principle alone while peers choose simpler routes. She had the option to remain at Fox and get paid. She could have moved on after tactfully accepting her layoff from CBS. She may have escaped accusations of disrespect by disclosing her sources. There was a simpler solution at every turn, and because it was the correct path, she always took the more difficult route. What should we do with all of this then? What does that imply for those of us who consume news, attempting to discern what is true, and attempting to comprehend a world in which every narrative has a purpose? It implies that we must recognize what we are losing. We must acknowledge that journalism's traditions are vanishing, and after they leave, we're left with hot takes and talking heads. Furthermore, no one is prepared to undertake the difficult, costly, and unglamorous task of determining the true nature of the situation. She is fighting for more than herself. Everyone is fighting for accountability, truth, and the kind of journalism that enables democracy. We all suffer when influential organizations, governmental businesses, and even news networks can function without worrying about being discovered. We all lose access to necessary information when sources don't trust journalists. We all lose the watchdogs that keep us safe from corruption when courts have the power to make reporters violate their word.